Hi, this is Roxanne Nilsen, and I am presenting this teaching strategy for literacy. And this is for Professor Ramers at University of San Diego. The teaching strategy that I've chosen to discuss is asking text-based evidence questions. By asking text-based evidence questions, what it does is it encourages students to look at the text to discover specific evidence that supports their answers. It also helps students learn to identify specific meaning and can explain their thoughts and content within the given text. Now, the text that I have chosen is the periodic table of elements. By looking at the periodic table of elements and answering these text-based evidence questions, this allows the students to answer at their own level of understanding. And it also provides students with opportunities to answer questions from their own perspective. A quote that I came across while I was researching this strategy came from a blog, Model Teaching: Education for Better Educators. And I love this because the quote states, "The evidence is right in front of you. You just have to take the time to find it." And we all know that is so true, that if you just can look in the text, you can find the evidence to support your answers. The content literacy standards that align with this particular strategy, as far as it relates to the content that I'm presenting, comes from the NGSS, the Next Generation Science Standards. And the middle school standard HSPS 1 1 is to use the periodic table as a model to predict the relative properties of elements based on the patterns of electrons in the outermost energy level. So by looking at the text, and learning the text, they can predict the patterns of the elements. Another standard that comes from the ELA literacy standards that just perfectly aligns with this strategy is to determine the meaning of symbols, key terms, and other domain specific words and phrases as they're used in a specific scientific or technical context relevant to the grades 6 through 8, middle school, the text and the topics. So by using this strategy, by asking text-based evidence questions, it allows the students to look at the text to access the text from their own perspective and their own understanding, and then apply it to the question, and then answer the questions while they're developing understanding from their own perspective. As far as culturally responsive instruction, the four facets that come from Zaretta Hammond that I looked at, the way that I'm presenting this content and the way that I'm using these text-based evidence questions, first of all, it hits on awareness. By using the color-coded graphic text of the periodic table of elements, it engages a brain-based learning to reach more students. Sometimes you can just look at a black and white text of the periodic table, and you're going to miss the students that cannot relate to this flat black and white image. But when you add the color coding graphic text, it allows them to see and understand groups and families and patterns on a completely different level that's focused on their brain-based learning. And it really allows them to look at the text and use it to answer the questions. Another facet of this culturally responsive instruction is information processing. By using their text to find details to complete the diagram handouts. So I've given them diagrams, fill in the blank. They have to use the periodic table. The questions asked are how many electrons, how many protons, how many neutrons. They have to look at the text and then fill in the blanks on the handouts. By doing this, it provides them with authentic opportunities to process and practice the evidence text-based content. It also hits on learning partnerships. Not only can I, as the instructor, model and practice the content vocab, but the other students in the class that already have developed a basic understanding of the language, By them practicing and modeling the vocabulary, it will help students to develop this language for learning. They will understand the language of what is a shell, what is an orbit, what is an energy level, and then relate it to the text that they're studying. And the last facet that this strategy hits on is the community of learners and learning environment. The way that I operate my classroom in this airplane mode, what this does is it creates a classroom ritual and routine that supports this culture of learning. The students in my classroom know that the flight attendants are the more knowledgeable others, and they can look to them to help them answer these questions. They can look to the flight attendant and say, okay, here's my periodic table. Can you help me understand and help me find the text so I can provide evidence for my answers? And it really ties everything up in a nice bow for the students to have have support in all areas so they can access the text and then develop a deeper understanding of what's going on in this content. Well, here's the references that the resources that I used. Obviously, the ELA standards, and I use Zaretta Hammond's Culturally Responsive Teaching. Also, the blog I mentioned, Model Teaching for Better Educators, and lastly, the Next Generation Science Standard as far as aligning for the content for this. Thank you so much for listening to my presentation. Look forward to seeing you all on Tuesday in class.